How did a regular guy named Pete save 65% of his take-home pay? And did it really enable him to retire after just 9 years of working at the ripe old age of 30? And what is the rule of 752 anyway? We'll answer these questions and more on this, the 7th episode of the DoughRoller Podcast.
Welcome to the DoughRoller Podcast, where the best thing money can buy is financial freedom. We help you make more, spend less, and invest the rest. And now your host, Rob Berger.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the 7th episode of the DoughRoller Podcast. We've got a great interview today, and it's a long one, so I'm going to get right to it. We spend over an hour talking with Pete, also known as Mr. Money Mustache. You may have heard of his blog. If you haven't, check out MrMoneyMustache.com. It's an excellent blog. And today we're going to find out how a guy worked for all of 9 years, and then at the ripe old age of 30, he retired. He's going to tell us exactly how he did it. And there's a lot of important lessons to learn from Pete and this interview. You know, even if you're way past 30, and your goal isn't figuring out how you can retire early. Maybe your goal is figuring out how you can retire at all. And I get a lot of emails from folks in their 40s and 50s who perhaps for whatever reason could have had medical issues, a divorce, a setback in a job. They're looking ahead and they're wondering how in the world they're going to retire. Well, some of the things that Pete did to retire early at age 30, I think folks in their 40s and 50s can do, really anyone, to put themselves back on track to retire. Perhaps it's at 65, or perhaps it's earlier than you planned. But he has a remarkable story, and I was thrilled. He was gracious enough to spend over an hour telling us how he did it. And so with that, we're going to go straight to the interview. Pete, welcome to the show.
All right, thanks, Rob. It is great to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you. I've been looking forward to this interview. For those listening, Pete and I were, before we hit the record button, we're kind of chatting about blogging. Pete blogs at Mr. Money Mustache, and we were kind of just talking about, the life of a blogger and how to market your blog and traffic. And at one point, I just said, we ought to really be recording this because some listeners might be interested in it. Pete, we don't have to go back and repeat everything, but you were telling me about a presentation you did at FinCon. Was that in 2012 or was that this year?
It was 2012.
And what was that about?
It was, the topic of that one was called Don't Build a Blog, Build a Cult. And it was kind of a joking title, but the idea was that the way to grow a blog these days, I was speculating, it's not by trying to trick the search engines by doing SEO stuff or trying to have like pop-up subscription boxes and the customer funnels and all this stuff that the marketers tell you. And instead, it's just doing the opposite of everything. For example, Google's engineers are a lot smarter than us, and their whole goal is to outsmart the SEO optimizers and find real content that people actually like sharing with each other. So when you SEO optimize, you're kind of making content that's less enjoyable for humans, which is going to make people forward your stuff less. And the smarter Google engineers get, and they're already smarter than us, the more they're going to beat the SEO people. So you just do the opposite of what all the other bloggers do. And that's kind of a good start for making a blog that grows naturally.
Yeah, I'll tell you, a couple of years ago, Pete, I would have disagreed with you. But I have certainly come full circle in particularly the last year. When I started blogging in 2007, I didn't even know what SEO was. I'd never heard of the term. I didn't have a clue how search engines work or how blogs work. And I was just, kind of like what you've always done. I was just writing stuff that I thought folks would want to read, all around the topic of personal finance and investing. But then when I started to learn about SEO and the money that a blog could make if it ranks for certain keywords, I'll be honest with you, I got addicted to it. It's like a drug. And you'd see all this money coming in. And I think for me and my blog, I lost my way for a couple of years. And I've kind of come full circle now where, I'm not oblivious to SEO, but I mean, it's maybe 5% of my thinking right now. And it's all about, what kind of, and it's whether I'm writing for DoughRoller. I also write for Huffington Post and U.S. News and MSN. So when I write there too, it's all about what kind of content can help folks make the most of their money. But it sounds like you had that figured out from the start.
Yeah, not that I figured out, but more like stumbled into it, just because writing for the purpose of making money wasn't appealing to me, first of all, but it would also be completely counter to the message of my blog, which is you get your money taken care of earlier in your life, and then you do what you actually enjoy doing. So, and therefore you don't make decisions based on money anymore. But the counterintuitive thing of that is if you can make a blog that actually grows more because you're not busy trying to make money off it, then it can actually make more money by accident. Because, if you make 1/10 as much, but your audience is 20 times larger, suddenly you're still doubling what you would have made as using kind of a more spammy approach where you're like, hurry up, get the credit card before you start this article and this kind of stuff.
Well, it's funny. I know the purpose of our interview today is to talk about how you retired at age 30. But let me ask you, it's actually one question I had. It was the last question in my notes, but I'll ask it now since it seems to fit. In preparing for this interview, I read interviews that you'd already given to it on sites like Forbes, Washington Post, I think NPR. And you've got a list of these on your blog, and it's just a huge list of interviews you've done. I think you've been on the radio, right?
Yeah, the NPR one was a radio one, actually.
Okay, right. So my question is, how did you get those? Did they just all contact you? Did you do anything to market your message to get some of these opportunities to?
Oh, no. I was fortunate enough that they just contacted me, and that was kind of the same message we were talking about in the at the beginning of the conversation, and same this presentation that I made. It was just completely ignore self-promotion and instead work on the other stuff and let your audience do the promotion for you. So, for example, the Washington Post article was probably the most fun thing I've ever done and the most amazing results because so many readers came from there. But the way that came about is that just some of the people who work, some of the younger people who work and write for the Washington Post got in touch with their boss, the editor of the Sunday business section, and said, hey, you should interview this Mustache guy. He's kind of weird and has interesting stuff to say. And she said, oh, well, thanks for letting me know. And then she got in touch with me and did this interview, and she did a wonderful job. I mean, it was really, really nice and long, and it wasn't all just like 5 tips for college loans or whatever. It was like really philosophical, and that's what people like reading. And it all came about automatically without promotion. So.
Yeah, that was a great interview. I read it. It was one of the ones that I read in preparation for this interview. And in fact, when I got done reading it, I immediately emailed it to my son, daughter, and my wife. Our children are old; they've moved out of the house. But I said, I'm interviewing this guy today, and you've got to read this interview from the Washington Post. So I'll include a link to that in the show notes. But it was a very good interview. And and I guess kind of what you're saying, J.D. Roth from Get Rich Slowly has often talked about the power of story, and I think his story, which he shares on Get Rich Slowly, it was a big part of the growth of his blog. And I think from what I've read on your site, it sounds like you've certainly used that same whether it was by design or just how you blog. I mean, it's the power of your story that I think resonates with so many people.
Yeah, and that's probably why I get along with J.D. Roth so well in real life, is because we both sit back and say the same stuff to each other. We're like, people should just tell stories. Come on. Forget all this money-making promotional stuff. And we're like cranky old men saying the same thing to each other.
He wrote an article on Get Rich Slowly not long ago about how he's kind of dipping into his savings to spend some money on some things. And the comments to that article, I'll leave a link to that in the show. I'm making a note now. I'll link to that article in the show notes. But frankly, the comments are what make that article so amazing, because there's this huge debate about how you should spend money. Is JD overspending? Is he spending recklessly? And he kept saying, "Look, guys, it's my life. I got to make these choices for myself. I can't decide how I'm going to spend my money based on the comments to my blog." But it was funny.
Yeah, I heard about that. He actually got a bit frustrated, and part of it was that the people commenting were, they were all talk and no listen. Some of them, because he's not spending his savings; he's spending some of the returns on his nest egg. So it's actually, the principle is still in there growing. We had a private conversation about this, and this is one of the principles I always talk about in early retirement. This, like, if I have a chunk of money in invested in index funds, and then I get checks from that every month. I'm not drawing down my savings. I'm spending some of the gains.
Right, and if it's gains from, as you said, stocks that pay dividends, not only are you just spending the dividends, but you're still getting the growth, the capital growth as the value of the stocks go up.
That's true. And even if you sell some stocks, as long as you don't sell them faster than their growth rate, which is going to be inflation plus a certain amount, then you're still coming out ahead over time. So a lot of people don't understand that. They think as soon as you sell a share, it's gone. And that's sort of true, but you can still become wealthier even as you sell some of your shares, because what stocks do is they slowly go up over the long term.
Right. Well, and it's also why stocks are so important to a portfolio over bonds. Not that you don't have some bonds, but some folks get scared of stocks, and really what they should be fearful of is too much in the bond fund. But maybe we're diving down a rabbit hole. Let's go to the beginning. So as I said, I've read a number of interviews that you've given. So here's what I've learned. Tell me if I got this right. You retired at the ripe old age of 30.
Yeah, that's true. I was almost 31. That was a month before my 31st birthday. Oh, well, don't give me too much credit.
This is not much of a story then if you were almost 31. Okay. You had worked for about 9 years?
Yeah, 9 years since graduation.
A whole 9 years, huh? Okay. And you graduated with a degree in engineering?
That's right, computer and electrical engineering.
Okay, so you're a smart guy.
Well, if that's all it takes, then yes.
Okay. And so when you start, let's go back to the beginning. When you graduated from college, did you have any debt?
Not really, no. I kind of paid my way as I went because I worked all through high school and saved up enough to pay for my first year. And then I just kind of lived really efficiently through school. Like I was able to live in my dad's apartment, which is fairly close to the school, for a couple of years, and then stay with my sister during work terms. And I kind of exchanged house services and building and stuff for some of these accommodations. And then I got great jobs in the summer and spent nothing. And I owned no car, until I was fully graduated and had a good salary. So things like that. No restaurants, basically, through my whole engineering career. I didn't even know that student loans were an option, actually. So that was a big advantage to me, too.
How could you not know that?
Well, my parents never borrowed money, and they never told me that that's what you could do. So I thought, well, back then, university cost about $10,000 a year. So in Canada, it's a little bit lower cost than it is in the U.S., but you also have to remember this is like 20 years ago. So I thought, well, I need $10,000 then. I better get to it. So I worked at a gas station starting at age 15, and then another gas station, and then a hardware store, and the money just comes together if you give yourself no other option.
So borrowing to go to school wasn't even on your radar. It wasn't something you considered and rejected. You just never viewed that as even an option.
Yeah, and once I got there, I kind of I ran into students who did have loans. And it was kind of funny because they'd have like the latest computer and like a brand new mountain bike, and they'd be going out to restaurants and using $60 bar tabs and stuff. And so a lot of times the borrowing was more to allow them to live an adult kind of graduated person lifestyle rather than to really pay for the basics of school.
Yeah, it sounds like your parents had a view about finances similar to yours. I mean, I think you mentioned that they didn't have they never borrowed money.
Right. They did have they had a mortgage for a while when I was really young, and that was in the early 80s. And then the interest rates went up to crazy rates, and they're like, this is ridiculous. I knew I shouldn't have got a loan. So we actually moved to another town at that point just so they could sell their more expensive house and have no mortgage. And that influenced the whole life of myself and my brother and two sisters. Is we grew up in this small town, kind of a beautiful little place, entirely because it was cheap at the time and my parents didn't want to have a mortgage.
So you kind of learned from their example.
I definitely did. Yeah, they're both still pretty frugal to this point, and I'm very kind of thankful for that example.
And are your siblings, your brother and two sisters, are they frugal like you and like your parents?
Pretty solid, I would say. Yep. Yeah. Overall, they're a non-ridiculous group. My oldest sister kind of jokes that she met a regular person and married, a regular husband who didn't have quite as much frugal genes built in. And she says that it's kind of corrupted her a bit. And so we joke about our different life situations. But I think she's turned around and she's reading Money Mustache and gradually recovering her upbringing now.
Right. Good. Okay, so you graduate without any debt to speak of. You have a degree in engineering. Is that when you moved to Colorado?
Well, I worked for a few years in Canada first, which is where I grew up. And then I heard about the job opportunities here in the States, and I fired out a bunch of resumes and got a nice free tour of the country for interviews, and then I picked a job here.
And so when you were starting out, you didn't have any debt, but did you have any savings?
No, I had nothing, just a degree and a backpack and a bike.
A degree, a backpack, and a bike. And 9 years later, you retire.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a great story. So how'd you do it?
Well, I started with some steps backwards because I thought, wow, I'm making $42,000 now. This is so rich. So I borrowed money from my second oldest sister to buy kind of a fancy car at the time. And so I was in debt for the whole first year of my working career. That's on the minus side, but at least I knew that had to be paid off, so I paid her back. And I lived with roommates. That was probably the biggest thing. I lived in this series of houses with a bunch of friends, and we called it Nut House 1, and then we moved, which became Nut House 2, and then we moved again, and there was Nut House 3.
Was this all in Canada?
Yeah, this was around the city of Ottawa, the capital of Canada. And we had a lot of great fun, but our rent was only $300 a month each, roughly, because I would go on to the classifieds, this is before Craigslist, and find these beautiful single-family homes with 4 bedrooms, and we would share them with 4 guys. So you get a better environment than an apartment, but rent is much cheaper. And then you share the utilities, and we would carpool, and we had a nice pool table in the living room, and lots of great parties and everything. So it was a big win-win because you save a ton of money and you have a much better lifestyle than everybody living in some sad old one-bedroom apartment in an old 1970s skyscraper.
Right. So how long did you work in Canada before you moved to Colorado?
It was 2 or 3 years, probably on the 2 side.
So 2 years in Canada, you said you started making about $42,000 after college.
Yeah, and then I was really hard working at the time. Very different from the lazy self that I am now. So I was working late weekends and nights and was really dedicated. So I got some pretty good raises, and I was up to about $60,000 by the time I came to the U.S. But at the time, which was 1999, the salaries were higher here than they were in Canada, and the taxes were lower. So I immediately got a raise to about $83,000 when I came here in the 90s. And that was a pretty good time for high-tech work, just as it is now. So then I moved. I went to the classified again and did my old trick of finding some roommates. And then I lived in Boulder, Colorado in these fun series of houses with other roommates. And I maintained the cheap rent and the high salary and saved up for the down payment for my first house.
So when you moved to the U.S., you'd been working for 2 years. Were you debt-free when you moved to the U.S.?
Yeah, I had some savings by that point. But it wasn't until got a little older that I started realizing hey, you can really save a lot if you continue the college, university lifestyle, even when you're in your mid-20s.
Right. Okay, so you move to the U.S., you start making $83,000 a year. You're living with some roommates, and you're saving to buy your first home.
Yeah, and then I got that down payment together and bought the first house.
How much was the down payment?
$47,000, which was 20% of my first house. That was $235,000 at the time. And I moved to that. It was just outside of Boulder because houses in Boulder, even back then, were too expensive for a young person. But luckily, it was close enough to bike. And that was my biggest, probably the biggest key to retirement is that I still made a point of getting a house within biking distance of work, which I always had insisted on. So it was about 8 miles from my job. And my girlfriend from Canada moved down and got herself a job, and we moved into this house together. And over the next 5 years, we worked hard, and I renovated the house because it was quite a piece of junk when I got it, because that's all I could afford. So 5 years of renovations and working and biking to work, and that's where the savings really came from, is low expenses, lots of fun in our lifestyles and a double engineering income, living, but with expenditures more on the, part-time janitor level scale.
And is that when you retired after the 5 years?
And well, it was a little bit more than 5 years in that time. I made a post about it once that was called A Brief History of the Stash.
I've seen that. I'll link to it.
Okay. And it kind of just described what happened each year to the best of my recollection. But at some point, we were getting a little older, getting close to 30, and we had realized we wanted to start a family, my then wife and I, and we wanted to both be parents to our kid, like both be full-time, semi-stay-at-home parents, instead of having one person always gone, working hard. So for the last few years of our work, that was our goal. So we were saving and investing and thinking, when our baby's born, we want to quit these corporate jobs so that we can both go through the battle zone of sleep deprivation together.
And you both quit at the same time?
More or less, yeah. She kind of switched jobs before me, and she went through this very part-time kind of thing with her family's company. And then I quit my job completely, and I started what I thought would be my dream retirement hobby job, which was house building. But that turned out to be a bit stressful, so I closed that company down a little bit after. So it was kind of a gentle transition. Full-time work, then part-time and hobby work, and then really nothing for a few years. And then now that our son is older, we're doing a bit more hobby stuff, but a lot of it's unpaid at this point.
Okay, well, I have some questions for you about when you retired. But before we get to that, you mentioned that you renovated your first home.
Yes.
What kind of renovations did you do, and how did you know how to do them?
Well, it was kind of everything, because this was a 1978 low-quality tract home, and it had grown into a nice neighborhood because that area is so close to Boulder, but the house was just awful. So I replaced everything, like every floor, knocked out a bunch of walls, replaced all the windows, redid both bathrooms, pretty much anything you can see I redid on that house, but I didn't build an addition or anything. And the reason I did that, or the way I did it, is I've always just been interested in building stuff ever since I was a kid. For example, I made my first bedroom at 15 years old by carving it out of the attic of my parents' Victorian house. So I just kind of picked stuff up as a kid. Never did any formal training. But carpentry is really easy. It's just a problem-solving thing, and you just fiddle around with it, and you get better over time. Or you can take courses and really blast into good quality carpentry quite quickly.
Yeah, I'm smiling as you say all this because I'm not so sure it would be that easy for me, but it sounds like it worked out well for you.
And that was a help to our savings, because by buying the house so cheaply because of its condition, when I later moved out of it, I was able to use it as a high-end rental. So that paid for a lot of our early years of retirement. It's just the nice rental income from that house. It was $1,600 a month. And then when I sold it, it was a good profit, not because of the housing market, but just because it was renovated so much that it was quite nice, and it sold on the first day after listing. Wow. So that was a boost. That was probably about $100,000 of my savings came from a little bit of appreciation on that property, basically at the rate of inflation, plus the work that I did. So I was getting paid in arrears for the 5 years of weekends I had dedicated to working on that place.
Why did you sell it?
Well, I had moved to a new town at that point. So that was in Louisville, Colorado. I moved up to Longmont, Colorado, which is 20 minutes away, because my hobby house building company was building a custom house in this area. And I'm so anti-commuting that I would never live somewhere where I had to drive 20 minutes to work. So I insisted that we move within biking distance of my new retirement job. And it was not a bad strategic move either, because the houses in Longmont are cheaper than the houses in Louisville, Colorado. So we were able to cash out, sold that house I'd fixed up and bought a much smaller one. And that also contributed to being able to be retired.
Right. Okay. So you as you were, you moved to Colorado, you eventually buy a house with your then girlfriend, now your wife. And you, over time, I suppose you get raises, but basically, from what I understand from the various interviews I've read, you saved roughly 50% of your gross income.
A bit more than that, yeah. Combined,
a bit more.
When we looked back, it looked like it averaged about 65%.
So you've told us about your housing situation. I take it, did the two of you ever own more than one car?
Yes. In fact, in our youth, we had 2 cars generally because young adults tend to think they need cars each. But once we were together and living together for quite a few years, we gradually realized that most of our driving was done together, especially given the fact that we could bike to work. So I ditched my, my young man car, which was hardly worth anything. It's kind of funny because you pay a lot for a car and then it depreciates to almost nothing.
Right.
And then since then, we've only had one car. And now we still have, we kind of have 2 right now, but one of them is a van that I just use for construction projects. You would never actually drive around solo in that thing because it's too big. We could live without that, actually. We could live with 0 cars if we ever wanted to. It's just that we're kind of lazy now.
Okay. You don't sound lazy, but I hear you. Okay. Well, how about TV, internet, and phones? Do you have a TV in your house?
No, I'm really anti-broadcast TV. I think it's kind of brain-destroying pablum. But we still we're not pure in that sense. We have an ability to watch movies. In fact, I have a nice movie theater set up in my basement, which is where I'm sitting now with a big projector on the screen that projects onto a nice wall. So we have the ability to watch movies, and there's a great sound system down here. We just, as a philosophical point, we don't watch TV because, there's other stuff to do with your time too. So what do you do? Buy DVDs, or do you have Netflix subscription? Yes, we have Netflix, and we're trying to decide between that and the Amazon Prime streaming service right now. But Netflix is about $8 a month for streaming. Pretty good. And then, of course, friends, you can share movies around with them. And to answer your other question, internet, of course, I have internet. I just have a good, top quality, very expensive internet connection because of blogging. Right. And phones, luckily, those have come down a lot in recent years. So we both use Republic Wireless phones, which is like a $25 a month unlimited thing that's indistinguishable from the expensive stuff because now they have a solid phone to go with it too. This interview is making me feel very small. I just want you to know, it's like everything you say you do, it's like I do the opposite. So I'm in the middle of a very expensive Verizon wireless contract, and I actually mentioned in my weekly newsletter how great Republic Wireless sounds and how I'm going to move to something like that as soon as my contract is over. I take it you're happy with their service? Oh, yeah. It's just a Sprint network with Verizon. It actually roams onto the Verizon network automatically. So you're basically getting Sprint and Verizon combined for $25 a month. And I take it you pay full price for the phone. Sort of. I think they subsidize it a bit. It costs $300 for this phone. What'd you get? It's a Moto X. Oh, yeah. So kind of a brand new top of the line phone. It's the news at Republic. So when you're doing really well now. Right. Well, when you picked Republic, did you consider like Virgin Mobile or other options? How did you decide on Republic? I learned about it from readers, actually. It was I used to have expensive AT&T stuff, but our company, kind of our home business was paying for it, so we pretended it wasn't expensive, but it was. Then some readers said, "Hey, have you heard of MVNOs? Whatever it is, I forget what it is, but like a network virtual operator. It's a reseller of a different way to get your phone service using the same towers. So there was one called AirVoice that let me keep my Apple iPhone and keep the AT&T network, but it just became $10 a month instead. But it was for very limited usage. So we switched our iPhones over to AirVoice, and suddenly we had like a $20 cell phone plan for 2 people, but we hardly used it, right? And then we realized we needed a bit more usage, especially with me being a blogger now. So that's when we switched to Republic. And that was also on reader recommendations because, collectively, the readers of the Money Mustache blog, they have a handle on the frugality system in the U.S., like right down to the last detail. They know everything. So they email me and they're like, well, you should use this, or, this is the way to get your clothes, or this is the way to get your phone. So I use that information and I share the stuff that's most useful to me. And you may have mentioned this, but where do you get your internet connection from? Who do you? Right now, I just have a little, it's from in my city, there's a really good internet scene. So the city offers its own internet access through a wireless network system. So you can tune in to their Wi-Fi, which is on all the telephone poles. So that's what I'm using now.
Is it free?
No, you pay $25 a month for that.
Man,
it's very good service.
That's great.
Yeah, and they're actually rolling out fiber optic to every home, which is going to be 1,000 megabit per second for $50 a month, unlimited use.
We need to move to Colorado. This is ridiculous.
Oh yeah, I talk about this on the blog a lot. Actually, Colorado's a little bit of a utopia, especially compared to the East Coast.
Yeah,
especially compared to like New York and Washington, because
where I live,
you got better weather, you got lower taxes in the property taxes, great services from the local government. Mountains. It's just I'm very happy here, and it's very bikeable too. I bike year round. I couldn't really. I mean, there's other places that are almost as good, but Colorado is right near the top of the country.
So, do you and your wife share? It sounds like you do, but do you guys share the same views about money and about consumption and lifestyle?
Yeah, thank goodness, because otherwise we'd be battling pretty hard at this point with me having this lifestyle of writing about frugality and stuff. She kind of she's a very logical woman, so she drifted into this lifestyle pretty easily. But for her, it was having kids that really set the fire. She was thinking, well, if we get our money stuff straightened out and we won't have to work when we raise children, that sounds great to me.
And so you sort of led the way, and she followed.
Yeah, I would say that's true.
And did this occur before you actually got married? In other words, did you know each other's views on money when you got married?
We did. We sure did, because we'd known each other for almost 10 years before getting married, and we'd lived together at various times, and we were never just Mr. and Mrs. Fancy Pants. We kind of just lived within our means. Neither of us ever borrowed money for anything. So our transition was just getting a little bit more hardcore. Like when I first got a job in the U.S., I bought this brand new motorcycle to celebrate my high salary. I had like this brand new Honda VFR, kind of high-end sport bike. And now I would never do something like that. And similarly, my wife, celebrating her new salary, would buy a lot of like top of the line athletic clothes and a lot of books from Amazon. And then she pared that back and realized, like, I only have one body. How many clothes do I need?
Yeah, right.
I only have one set of eyes. You don't need to own a huge stack of books because libraries exist.
Right. Well, as you look back on your working years and how you were handling money, do you see any mistakes you made, things you'd do differently today, apart from, I guess you mentioned the motorcycle?
It wasn't too bad looking back. There was just a little bit, just a little bit consumery at the beginning, but I don't really regret that. It didn't really set me back, and it's not like it's a race anyway. I mean, even if some people fixate on my 30 years old number and they're like, oh, well, I could never do that. But the way the math works out is that you could have quite a low salary and not a very hardcore frugality lifestyle at all and still be retired by 40, right? Because that's 19 years of savings instead of my 9. And, you still get to freedom quite early.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the math for a minute, because I've read where you've written that if you save 50% of your income, you can retire in 17 years.
Yeah, that's about the right estimate.
So how does that math work out in terms of what return on investments you need to make that happen, and what your investments would look like after 17 years that would allow you to retire?
Okay. Well, if you just imagine really quickly, like let's say you make $40,000 a year, take home pay after all your taxes, and you put away $20,000 of that and live off the other $20,000, then suddenly you've got $20K, which is pretty nice. And then that December, suddenly your $20K is earning stock. The stocks are paying you dividends and growing. And the assumptions that I did for this calculation are that you would get 5% return after investment, which includes the dividends and the growth of your stocks, or whatever else. You can do a lot better with rental houses. And then the next year you save another $20,000, but then there's also that $1,000 that the first $20,000 generated. So then you have 41 saved or whatever.
And the compounding.
Yeah. So it's sort of if you make a table of this over a number of years, like 17 years in this case, eventually the returns on your investments are just as high as your spending. you're spending $20,000 a year, and as soon as your nest egg is generating $20,000 a year all by itself, then you're not needed anymore. Your job isn't needed anymore. So you can just quit and keep drawing that 20,000. And if you did your math right, the nest egg is going to keep growing along with inflation. So that means your 20,000 that you're getting each year for free keeps growing. And that's my definition of retired. So whether you keep working or not after that, hopefully it's something that you love. You're no longer working for money because you don't technically need to work for money.
I seem to recall that you published on your site a chart that showed you, if you save X percent, it'll take you this long to reach that goal.
It's one of my favorite posts and one of the most popular ones.
What's
it
called?
The shockingly simple math behind early retirement. And it's meant to dispel all this nonsense that shows up in the media these days about America's retirement crisis. We have to save $5 million and 0% of Americans are ever going to be able to retire, and 80 is the new 65 and all this junk.
I wrote an article about that anyway.
Oh, you wrote one?
Something like that, yeah.
Am I going to have to come on and make fun of it?
You can if you want.
Because
you wouldn't be the first. So
what I explain is that your time to retirement depends on only one factor, which is your savings rate as a percentage of your take-home pay.
Yeah.
So if you're saving basically nothing, which is what most people do, like say 10%, and you just blow the rest on car loans and sofas, couches, then you're going to have a 51-year working career unless somebody else comes in and gives you a gift, like some Social Security or some inheritance or whatever. But if you slide that up 20%, for example, then your working years to retirement is only 37 years. And you keep going, you get to 50%, that's 17-year working career. Or on my blog, I kind of suggest getting a little more hardcore and save in the 60 to 70% range of your income, which is an 8 to 12-year working career. And that's great because, everybody should stop worrying about money and then have freedom for the last 40 or 50 years of their lives. And I'm not proposing a nation of loafers where we're all just golfing and doing stuff. It's actually a secret mission where I want people to continue to be productive and contribute to society, but you can just be a lot more ethical when the demon of needing to make next month's mortgage payment is not hanging over your shoulder, stabbing you. So so get your money taken care of early, and when you save a ton of money, your life gets better, not worse. You're not giving up stuff that actually is happiness producing.
Yeah. Well, and there's sort of a double benefit if I follow your thinking. As you save more, you're doing two things. One, obviously, you're saving more. You're putting more money, I should say investing more. You're putting more money in investments that can then earn income and dividends for you. But at the same time, you're also shrinking the amount of money you need to live on.
Yeah. And what I call that is building your frugality muscles, because with no training, you're just going to do what everybody else around you does, and then you feel suddenly your needs are very high. What you feel are your needs. Like you think you need a big house, and you think you need air conditioning down to 72 degrees all summer and everything else, and all these little parasitic costs in your life that suddenly inflate it so that you're spending $70,000 just to live. And if you think you need $70K to live on, that means you're going to need like $2.8 million before you have enough to retire.
Right. Well, so I read that, when you were accumulating your savings, you were investing it as you were in your working years. You'd max out your 401k, and then I think you invested primarily or maybe exclusively in Vanguard index funds. Is that right?
That's true. Other than paying off our mortgage a little bit faster, we'd double up when I got a bonus from work or whatever. We'd kind of throw it into the mortgage because we wanted to get rid of that as well.
And can you give us sort of a sense of your asset allocation, maybe even as it exists today? How much do you have in stock funds versus bond funds?
I've never been really interested in bonds, so I have zero in bonds. But so I think of paying off your mortgage, though, as a form of bond, because that's a guaranteed return equal to your mortgage rate, which is probably higher than today's bond yields anyway.
It is, yeah.
And
I've given a lot of thought to that, which is why I chime in quickly. It is. The bond yields are horrible right now.
Yeah, and over a really long time, you can win no matter what you do. It just might take a little bit more money. Now, one of the highest returns you can earn if you develop the skill is having a little bit of rental house action in your area. This doesn't work inexpensive cities like San Francisco and New York, because the rent to price ratio is no good. The prices are so high. But in most areas of the United States, because we have some of the cheapest housing in the world right now, you can buy a rental house, and whether you buy it in cash or whether you finance it with today's cheap money, and then you manage it well, that's going to return more. It's going to be more like 10 to 15% on your invested capital, which is really good. So I actually have most of my savings still in a rental house, or not most, but a good chunk. And it's not even a very good rental house. It's too expensive. It's too fancy. It's one that I built with my construction company and never got around to selling. But still, just the rent from that, which is $2,400 a month, that's my whole family living expense with a little bit to spare. And then I have the rest of it is just in pure Vanguard funds, mostly a 50-50 mix of the Vanguard. I forget the names. VFINX is the U.S. everything fund. That's a U.S. top 500 fund.
Oh,
and then there's
S&P 500 fund.
Yeah, what I should say, actually, to make it less confusing, is I suggest if you want it really simple, you buy the entire U.S. stock index, which is VG or VTSAX, I think is the ticker symbol of that.
Yeah, the total market.
Yeah, the total market. And then the VGTSX, which is the everything except the U.S. So it gets the European stocks and some emerging market stocks. So
a 50-50 split between U.S. and foreign.
Yeah, that's one way to do it anyway. And I'm not really I read all the books on investing science and asset allocation, but the difference between just doing what I said and doing a really optimal thing is a fairly small percentage in expected returns. Yeah. So unless you really enjoy that, I think you just try to keep it simple. Keep your fees low is the most important thing. Don't go and sign up for a financial advisor where they're going to charge you like 2.5% on each fund and then another front load and all this stuff.
Right, absolutely. I own with a partner. I own several single-family rental homes, and you mentioned the rent-to-price ratio, which is something we focus on very closely. But I'm curious what you view as sort of an acceptable rent-to-price ratio.
It depends on your area. So in my area, the best you can do, I really watch every sale in the whole town just for fun. If you pick the perfect single-family rental house, you can sometimes get 1% of the purchase price per month. So like a $130,000 house, and rent it out for $1,300 a month. So that's you could call that the 1% rule.
Yeah.
Now, more expert and hardcore landlords will go for the 2% rule, which is doubling that. That's usually found in multi-unit buildings, though, and usually in less good neighborhoods. So maybe you'd buy a fourplex, and it costs you $25,000 per unit, but yet you're renting them out for $500 a month per unit. So that's a lot better return on your investment, but often it comes with a bit more baggage. Like you might be dealing with very fast turnover, or you might be in a neighborhood where there's social problems or stuff like that. So it all depends on your personal tolerance and your strategy and what your city is like.
Yeah, we go by the 1% rule too. Although I live in Virginia, I grew up in Ohio, and that's where I invest. And so the rent to price ratios are much better there. And we shoot for 1%. And sometimes we do a little better. We typically buy HUD foreclosures and then fix them up, and you usually get at least 1%. But the thing on multifamily, we found they definitely cash flow better, but they don't appreciate as quickly, and they're harder to sell. Of course, if you want to keep it long term and you're just interested in the cash flow, that could be a great option. So right now you just have the one rental unit?
Yep. I like it really simple. And I've got the best tenant in the world there, so I don't even have to visit it more than once or twice a year. And everything's just automatic deposit, automatic transfer. This guy maintains the house because he's very handy and nice guy. So it just gets better every time I see it. And that's kind of my philosophy for rentals is, how much do you need? You only need a couple $1,000s a month to live on, maybe 3 if you have more kids than me. So that's 3 small houses or 2 medium-sized houses, and you're done.
Yeah.
That's your retirement, all taken care of. So it's cool, though. Some people I know, some of the Mustachians that read the blog, have 100 units.
Is that right? 100?
Yeah, people who read biggerpockets.com and get really into the science, and they're like, yes, and they're doing bigger and bigger deals. one of my neighbors on my street actually has a 300-unit apartment building somewhere way off like Oklahoma or Kentucky. And he's very wealthy because of it. It's great if you enjoy it, but kind of my whole mission is, you don't need a ton of money to retire. You don't have to be a big wheeler dealer. You just need your groceries paid for and, your vacations and whatever else you want to do. And that doesn't add up to very much.
Yeah. Bigger Pockets, you mentioned, that's a great, if you're listening and you're at all interested in real estate investing, biggerpockets.com is a great resource. Josh, who runs it, I guess owns it. Did you meet Josh? Did you meet him in St. Louis?
Indeed, yeah, a couple of times. I met him at both conferences.
Okay, yeah, he's a good guy, and I've known him for a number of years. And Bigger Pockets is a great resource. I'm curious on the investing philosophy where you don't own any bonds. Has that always been your philosophy? Even when you were working, it was just all stocks?
Yes, just because of the Bogleheads type stuff that I read, John Bogle philosophy of investing, and they say that as you get older, you'll shift towards a bond mix and all this stuff to keep your volatility lower. But when I really looked at the math, it didn't make that much difference. And there's always debate on it anyway. And it seems like bonds are more for people who are afraid of volatility and they get worried when they look at their portfolio and it's 20% lower or 50% lower in a crash. And then that helps those people stay the course and not go, sell everything and buy gold or whatever. For me, I don't care at all about the sticker price of my portfolio. Like, I don't look at it and say, there was a crash, I own less money. I just think I have the same number of shares, so I'm exactly as wealthy as before. And they're on sale. So if I have enough cash, I can pick up some more and then I'll have even more wealth.
Well, and that was going to be my next question. How did you handle 2008 and 2009?
Yeah, well, there was nothing needed to do to handle it. I just... it didn't hurt me in the stock sense because I wasn't selling stocks. I was living off rental house income. I was able to buy a few more shares at the low prices, so I guess it helped me a little bit. On the minus side, the housing crash that preceded the and it continued after the stock market crash, that affected me because my construction company had just finished building its second house, and the first house sold immediately for its full asking price. The second house I built couldn't sell no matter how much I dropped the price. So that's why I converted it into a rental, and I still have it to this day. So it's turned into a happy story, a few painful memories. But now I could actually sell it, and I'm working on getting that done this year because I'd like to put the money to work in a more efficient place, some more index funds or maybe a different rental house.
Yeah, okay. So from what I've read and what you've said today, your view was you need about 25 times your annual spending, whether it's from rental houses, dividends from investments, or whatever. You need 25 times in investments, 25 times your annual spending.
That's true, and that 25 times is based on stock investments.
Okay.
So you can get away with a bit less money if you have rental houses, because with rentals, you just need the net benefit after all expenses to pay for your for your personal living costs. And if you happen to have a house that's worth $300,000, but it gives you $1,500 a month clear, this is just a random example, then you're done.
Right.
If you happen to be, like, for example, a single person who lives on $1,500 a month, and change the numbers however you like to match your situation. But so you don't think about the 25 times rule when you have rental houses.
Okay.
But with stocks, you do, because in the long run, you can expect stocks to very, very roughly be able to sustain a 4% withdrawal rate, for a 30-year retirement period, and often much better than that. The 4% is based on kind of a worst-case scenario, and there's argument right now that we might be in one of those worst-case scenarios. So if you're worried about that, then just make it 30 times instead of 25 times, and you're all set.
Yeah, I think if you can be flexible with how much you take out each year, so that like in an 08, 09 bear market, you can take out less.
Yeah.
I think the 4% rule, has a lot more flexibility, and I think it could last longer than 30 years.
Yeah, it generally will.
Yeah.
And yes.
And you had your house paid off, so that obviously lowered the amount of your monthly spending.
Right.
Yeah.
It's all early retirement is very much about flexibility and different life situations, and it's very different from if you're retiring at 70 And let's say, imagine you're retiring at 70 with health problems and with a lot of fixed costs for some reason, like maybe you have prescriptions or whatever. In that situation, it's a little different because you're not going to run out and get a new job, or you might feel very accustomed to your spending, and a lot of it might be locked in. When you retire younger, everything changes every year. So you just got to be generally on the right path. Like you might spend more one year, you might spend less by not traveling as much the next year. Someone might give you some money for work one year and you might not earn anything the next year. Right. So it changes, but as long as you're not addicted to spending, then you're going to be just fine.
So when you were working, and I think earlier you'd said, you were of course investing money, but you were also using some of your income to pay down your mortgage.
That's true.
How did you decide how much to put on your mortgage versus how much to put into Vanguard funds?
It was very unscientific. It was kind of, in general, I would just take the leftover of every paycheck and buy Vanguard funds. But when there was a windfall, like a bonus, then we would pay off the mortgage. It's just totally random.
Yeah,
I just figured as long as the money is going somewhere productive, then you're doing the right thing.
And one question too, you mentioned prescriptions, and there's obviously costs, healthcare costs. Do you have health insurance?
Yes, we have your typical high deductible health insurance plan. So it's got it covers things only after your first $10,000 you'll have to pay for yourself out of pocket, and that insurance costs $240 a month for our family of 3. So fairly low monthly cost. We picked that just because we don't have any health conditions ourselves. So there's generally our health costs are approximately $0 per year. And if somebody breaks a bone or gets a disease or whatever, then it'll cost $10,000. So it's that wouldn't be a big hit to us. And it's also very unlikely that you're going to go anywhere close to $10,000.
Have you figured out yet how Obamacare will affect that?
I have, yeah. I wrote an article about that. I got lots of people coming out of the woodwork to complain in the comments because they were politically opposed to Obamacare. But the real answer is that because it's a sliding scale of how much of the insurance you pay yourself, if I were living on my current level of spending, which is around $25,000 a year, and if I just had the level of income to pay for that, our health insurance would be free. Because that's considered like, oh, you poor family, you're in poverty, $25,000. So it would be fully subsidized. So that's nice. I think of that as a safety net, and I pointed that out to other potential early retirees. Now, on the other side, people don't have to get mad at me for sponging off the system because I do earn money these days, and because of that, I'm going to get no subsidy, and so our health insurance is going to go up. Whenever we switch to a full Obamacare plan, like in a year. So it'll be about $400 a month at that point, and in exchange for better coverage. So our deductible is going to be a lot lower. It'll be like $4,500, I think, and more things are covered. And it's not my favorite bargain to make. I'm very anti-insurance, so I prefer to take all the risk myself. But, I get a little bit more peace of mind in exchange for a higher premium. So
yeah.
It's going to be fine either way.
Yeah, it's interesting. Under the Affordable Care Act, subsidies are based on income. They have absolutely nothing to do with how much in assets you have.
Yes,
because you can be a multimillionaire and still get subsidies if your income doesn't exceed 400% of the federal poverty level. Yeah. Which is a bit curious. I'm not sure why they did it that way, but it is what it is.
I know why.
It's good. Why did they do it that way, Pete?
It's because it never occurred to them that anybody would have savings without income. Because
you think that's really? Come on.
Well,
there's a lot of smart people in there.
But in this country, it's almost universal that everybody spends all their money, and the only possible way you could end up with, say, $1 million in savings is by earning like $700,000 a year,
right? And
for 20 years, and then maybe you'll have $1 million saved up,
right?
It's so rare that the system is not set up for it. So I always joke with my readers that Mustachianism is a way to beat the system because you're doing what nobody else has done. And just as an example, when I tried to get mortgages, for example, on rental properties, the banks don't know how to handle me in the last 3 years because they're like, what do you mean you have $20,000 of income or $30,000 and then you want us to lend you $250,000?
Right.
And I'm like, well, look, I have these assets that are more than the house I'm buying. And they're like, what do you mean? You don't have assets. I'm like, yes, look, it's $1 million here, or whatever. They don't even know, like they don't even have a mortgage that can accommodate that because they're so used to income being the only way to base the credit worthiness.
Right. Okay. Two more questions, if I can keep you for just a couple more minutes.
No time limit.
Okay. I read, then I may have 20 questions. No, probably just two. I read, I don't know if it was in an interview or on your site, but you have this, I call it the rule of 752, how you determine the cost of something based on expenditures over a decade.
Right.
Can you tell us about that?
Yes, it's because I'm trying to discourage short-term thinking. So a lot of people are like, hey, this glass of wine at the restaurant's $8 and I have $8 in my wallet, so I guess I'll buy it. And so people borrowing a car, the car payments, it's $199 a month, and I make more than that in my little job, so I guess I can afford it. So instead, I encourage people to think of everything over a minimum of 10 years, because when you get old like me, I'm 39 now, you realize that 10-year periods pass, and they stack up in your lifetime, and then the effects start to build. So if you're spending something every week, say you're spending $10 a week, which is a very small amount, that would just be like one little short weekend visit to the coffee shop for two people. You want to know how that affects you in 10 years. It's really $7,520 that you're losing every 10 years. And you got to say every 10 years because you're going to live more than one 10-year session. And a lot of people spend more like $100 a week on stuff, like commuting. They just spend $100 a week on car costs. So that's $75,000 every 10 years. So the way you calculate that is you assume that you invest that money instead with a 7% return is how I got that particular figure. And it just adds up to crazy numbers. So multiply everything by 752 before you buy it.
So that's 752 times the weekly cost of whatever you might indulge in.
Yeah, and
okay.
I think if you're doing monthly, then you think of it as 173. That might be the number.
Right. Okay, that is good because it's so, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody, but you get the subscription to the magazine or you buy a book once a week on Amazon Kindle because it's so easy, and let's be honest, there's nothing cooler than an iPad. And, like you said, it adds up decade after decade.
Yeah, and the biggest thing is more like food and lunches. I feel like people going out to lunch from work is one of the most inefficient things because a lot of times they're like, hey, where are we going to go for lunch? And then everyone gathers into an SUV, drives out into the big trafficy city. And so they're spending like $10 on the driving cost and maybe $12, $15 each on the lunch. And if you do that every day, that's $100,000 that you're out in 10 years. And so it makes really, really a giant difference, a seemingly harmless habit like that.
Yeah, I mean, I've started working from home more and more. I probably only go into the office one day a week, and it's saved me a fortune between gas and, of course, I work downtown DC, so there's parking, and if I eat out for lunch, it adds. I mean, you don't even have to multiply it for 10 years. You can just look at it on a monthly basis, and it's a big number.
Oh yeah, parking. Imagine paying to park so you can work. That just blows my mind.
Let's think about this. For me, parking in downtown DC, about 4 blocks from the White House, costs me $20 a day. So that's $100 a week. So if I use your little formula, that's $75,200 every decade.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's rough. And that's just for the parking. I haven't gone out to eat yet. I haven't even gotten a deli sandwich.
Yeah, that's true. Now in a salary situation, like a $400,000 plus salary, stuff like that can be justified, if you're thinking, well, I have to be downtown because Barack wants to meet with me every day, and this is the only way I can make $400,000. So I may waste a ton on getting to and from work, but you make so much, you can still save more than 65% of your income, and that works out, But
right.
It doesn't work out if you're paying $20 a day to park in order to make $40,000 a year, and it also doesn't work out if you're a lawyer and you're like, well, I'm a lawyer and I make $400,000, so I also need a lake house and I need a yacht, and then suddenly you've got a junky little 10% savings rate again, and then all your high salary is not really getting you anything.
Well, a little story there, because I do practice law at one of the largest, firms in the world, I think. And I know a lot of lawyers there and in other firms that, make eye-popping cheap salaries, but they do. They have the second, sometimes the third home. They're all driving $100,000 cars. Their kids are going to schools that cost them 40, 50,000, high schools that cost them 30, 40, 50,000 a year. Of course, they belong to the country club. And, they live, by all appearance, a very, very wealthy, and they do. They live a very wealthy lifestyle. But compared to what they're making, their bank accounts are, they're just not saving, and they're sort of stuck in this. It's like a hamster on a wheel. You got to keep running. You got to keep moving. You got to keep billing 2,000 plus hours a year to keep the income, to keep the lifestyle. Yeah,
I find that whole thing hilarious when people manage to squander, a giant salary, and they think they're buying happiness with all these extra purchases, but they're not. I mean, you have to ask yourself, would I do my job for free? And that's the only time that you are that you're making a good choice spending all your money, because otherwise you're working so that you can spend it, and you're just you're deceiving yourself, really.
Well, and the legal industry has gone through a lot of changes since 2008, and a lot of partner level attorneys at big firms have lost their jobs. And
right.
When you're 45 or 50 and you don't have a lot of your own clients, and you lose your job at a big firm, it's virtually impossible to find another job making the same money you were making. And if they haven't saved anything, a lot of them hadn't, at least not relative to how much they were making. They're in a world of hurt, and I feel for them. But like you said, I guess frankly, I was headed down that path 10 years ago. And I'll just as I guess my story, one of the best decisions I made was to actually leave the big firm law practice, and I took a 6-figure pay cut and went to a job at a company. And I won't go through all the details, but it was a hard decision. I mean, I'd worked hard. I made partner at a big firm, and then I quit. And there were a lot of reasons for it. But I can remember going to the new job, and I went from this corner office, in downtown Washington, to this building in Virginia, and I had this tiny office that literally used to be a closet, internal office, and I'm 6-figure pay cut, and I'm sitting there thinking, what in the world did I just do? Am I an idiot? And for 1,000 reasons, it was the best decision I ever made.
Yeah. Well, once you get enough money, then more money is completely useless. For all the big-time lawyers, I would really encourage them to get their freedom set up right away. Just cut out a few boats and a few vacation homes or whatever it takes to get, maybe $2 million saved up, which is a very cushy retirement pad. And then you're no longer dependent on your job. And then you can really decide, like, well, the boss wants me to work an extra 100 hours this month, but I think I'm going to go fishing instead. And it doesn't matter because I don't need to earn money anymore. I'm going to work only on my own terms. And that is just way more valuable than any private school or other bit of consumer nonsense. Just get your freedom first and then make decisions once from the position of a free person.
This may sound really pathetic to folks listening, but I talk to lawyers that have $3, $4, $5 million in the bank, and they still don't think they have enough to retire.
It's true. Well, they don't if they think they have to keep spending everything they're spending. But I would say that, I mean, my lifestyle, which costs $25,000 a year, is just incredibly, just so ridiculously decadent that I could not imagine. I mean, people should be punching me in the face for the kind of insanely nice lifestyle that I live. So if you're going above that, this is with one kid, right? So you can scale it up to 40 if you have multiple kids, say 3 kids. But, you got to draw a limit. You got to learn to identify ridiculousness at some point.
Well, this sounds like, just from talking to you today, it sounds like something that maybe your parents taught you from a young age, but frankly, it's not something that I learned early in life, but I eventually learned it. And it's sort of the theme of this podcast. I end every podcast with sort of my motto, which is the best thing money can buy is financial freedom. And it was something, when I started in a law practice, to me, the best thing money could buy is a fancy car and a country club membership. And frankly, I was following in the footsteps of my father, who had the Mercedes. My father had a Rolls Royce. He had and my parents were divorced, so I didn't live with my father. I lived with my mom, sort of lower middle class. We didn't have a lot of money, but my father was wealthy. And he had the country club membership, and then he died in a car accident when he was 39.
Oh, wow.
And not to sort of go into that whole story, but there was a part of me that wanted to follow in that sort of lifestyle. And I got the Mercedes and I got the country club. And a couple of years afterwards, I thought, this is ridiculous. I don't even like to golf that much. I joined a country club that was so expensive that all of the friends that I did golf with couldn't afford to join it. So I'd go to a public course so I could play with my friends.
Yeah.
And I said to my wife one day, I said, this is insane. I'm quitting. And anyway, you do get into this. Part of it, I think, I don't know that it was for me as much, but I think for a lot of people, it's a peer pressure. It's this trying to live a life that will impress your friends and your family and your neighbors, and you end up going down a path that I think you end up looking back and saying that was just a waste.
Yeah, I tell people to focus on happiness and learn about what human happiness really means, and then at that point, you will learn that what you spend on yourself has nothing to do with your happiness. So you can be happy on any level of spending, short of hunger and cold or whatever. But other than that, you can be happy on any level of spending. So just set your spending at a level that will get you your freedom. And I would suggest for higher income people, just make 75% savings rate your goal. Just spend 25, which is still way, way more than enough. And your freedom will come very quickly. You're going to end up a lot happier too, and probably more physically fit and healthy and everything too. And it's just really, really easy. Like, it's an amazing shortcut that nobody tells you. You can take over this entire country with just this amazing, very obvious secret programmed right into human nature, and nobody knows it because it's not on the TV.
So what's the future for Mr. Money Mustache and his family?
I plan to popularize this message so that what I just said is no longer true. And everybody knows that spending has no relationship to happiness. And so the idea is to build a nation of people who are no longer addicted to consumption. And in fact, a world of people who are no longer addicted to consumption, because as the rest of the world develops and gains wealth, I don't want them to follow in the Cadillac Escalade path of just bullshit living. We can completely have a much better way of running the world and running our lives if we understand what real happiness is. And that's going to be a lot better for sustainability on a planet with a lot of people, is just have a bit more of a Zen-like existence for the human race.
So how do you see, you've got the blog, of course, and you do interviews like this, for which we're grateful. How else do you see spreading that message? Do you plan to write a book? Do you?
Yeah, it's not really me that has to do the spreading. I think just having a good enough message, people spread it themselves, which is why the blog has gained a large readership already. I'm going to do the best I can, and I am going to write a book, and eventually we do some documentaries and stuff like that too. But I think it's just a matter of making the message crystal clear, and because it has its own truth. I mean, this is we're just following the human nature and understanding happiness. So once people latch onto that, they naturally like it and they share it with their friends.
I wonder if you might do me a favor. Is when we hang up, would you mind shooting me an email with links to articles on your site, 5, 10, whatever, but for folks that kind of want to dig deeper into your message and understand it better, links that I can put in the show notes for, again, however many articles, but sort of the popular or key articles on your site that people can read to get a sense as to your, more details about your story and your message.
Yeah, I think I can do that with just one article, actually, because I wrote kind of an introduction one that's called Getting Rich from Zero to Hero in One Blog Post. And it links to about 10 or 15 other articles for the studious people who really want to get the background information. But it also starts with just a nice paragraph where if you have 1 minute, you can read just that.
Okay,
so I'll send that to you.
That'd be great. I'll include that along with the other ones we've talked about. Well, Pete, this has been terrific. I'm very inspirational. Like I said, as I was preparing for this interview and reading your past interviews, I'd go up to my wife every 15 minutes. You're not going to believe what he did this. What do you think about this? Should we get rid of our TV? On and on.
You should get rid of your TV.
I'm driving my wife crazy. Good. Well, listen, I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot for your call. It was great to talk to you as well.
Great. Well, I hope you enjoyed the interview with Pete. I've, of course, prepared for the interview and then after the interview, as I do with all of my podcasts, I go back and I listen to the entire interview. It's how I prepare the show notes for each interview. And I tell you, each time I hear the interview or read about what Mr. Money Mustache has accomplished, I find it incredibly inspirational and motivational. I look around my house and check my budget, and I think of all the wasteful ways that we spend money and how much we could do so much better. And so I really appreciate Pete taking the time to talk with us. And I hope you enjoyed the interview and benefited from it. I hope it helps you, improve your finances. Perhaps you have an early retirement story you want to share, and if you do, please reach out and let me know. But that brings our podcast to a close. As always, you can get the show notes. In this case, it will be at DoughRoller.net/podcast7. That's podcast and the number 7. And feel free to reach out to me with questions or comments. Love to hear from listeners. You can reach me at dr@DoughRoller.net. You can subscribe to this podcast and leave a review of this podcast. Just go to DoughRoller.net/iTunes. That will redirect you to the iTunes page where this podcast resides. I love to get reviews. I appreciate honest reviews. They help me improve the show, and be grateful if you did that. And then finally, if you're not a subscriber to our newsletter, I encourage it. We send out a weekly newsletter every Saturday at 8 p.m., packed full of resources that can help you with your money. Just go to DoughRoller.net/newsletter, and you can quickly sign up. It's free, and we'd love to have you join. So until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.